people have known, therefore, an hour in advance, like CNN, that it was going to come down. And they knew. It's very clear. They keep it on the screen. And they keep saying, oh, it's going to come down soon. Woo, it's going to come down really soon. How did they know? Well, I looked into this a little bit. You can find this article on the internet, Waiting for 7, which is a quotation from a firefighter who says, we stood around all afternoon waiting for 7 to come down. World Trade 7 collapse warnings in the New York Fire Department oral histories. So I went through the 10,000 pages of oral histories of the New York firefighters, which had been collected after 9/11, to look for references. A lot of firefighters knew this building was going to come down. And most of them did not know it was going to come down on the basis of what they saw with their own eyes. Oh, gee, it's really badly damaged. Most buildings that I've seen in the past damaged like that come down. No. It was, we were told it's going to come down. And that's why we knew. How far in advance did they know? Some of them knew 2 hours before it came down. Some of them knew over 4 hours before it came down that it was going to come down. How could they have known? I think they knew because someone told them who in fact was going to bring it down. Foreknowledge is something that's characteristic of controlled demolition. And again you say, yes, but what do you know about buildings? And so I'm forced to give 2 little quotations. I'm getting close to the end here. Hugo Bachmann, let's look at his bio. Professor Emeritus and former chair of the Department of Structural Dynamics and Earthquake Engineering, and so on and so forth. I guess I would just refer to one of his publications, Structural Construction for Engineers, an Introduction. Perhaps also Earthquake-Proofing Buildings. In any case, he's very brief and to the point, Mr. Bachmann. In my opinion, the building World Trade Center 7 was with great probability professionally demolished. Jack Keller, his competence is less directly in building construction, but he's a very eminent American scientist, PhD agricultural and irrigation engineering, but he is a member of the National Academy of Engineering, elected fellow of the American Society of Civil Engineers, selected by Scientific American magazine as one of the world's 50 leading contributors to science and technology benefiting society, 2004. And what does Mr. Keller say? And I really like this man's statement. Without any serious study, I had simply accepted that the events of 9/11 were as commonly perceived, although I was not happy with the way the disaster was being used to promote what I felt were illegal and self-defeating imperialistic policies in the guise of the war on terrorism. It was not until early 2006 that I stumbled upon sufficient information to become suspicious of the official and generally accepted 9/11 storyline. This led me to do my own investigation, during which I discovered the demise of World Trade 7, which I was heretofore unaware of. Obviously, it was the result of controlled demolition and scheduled to take place during the confusion surrounding the day's events. I now feel morally obligated to deal with and expose the politically unthinkable issues surrounding the 9/11 phenomenon. Well said, Dr. Keller. Now, you know, most of my own research on 9/11, in fact, almost all of it has been on the Twin Towers, which I'm going to deal with only briefly today. Let me try and summarize for you what one of the greatest mysteries of the fall of the towers really is. And it's not actually a fall. The term fall is quite misleading. They were violently pulverized. Here's the question. How do we get from this, which is the airplane, this is what the North Tower looked like. North face had been hit just a few minutes before. How do we get from that to this in an hour and a half? This is the building being violently pulverized so that in a space of between 14 and 24 seconds, it goes from a very tall, 1,300 feet tall, very strong steel structure into essentially a cloud of material rushing through the streets of Manhattan. How do we get there? Now, you know, I don't know a whole lot about buildings, and on 9/11 and for some time thereafter, I assumed there was a reasonable explanation. But 7.5 years later, it's not good enough anymore to just have some vague notion that planes struck buildings very, very hard and therefore they came down. That may have been fine on 9/11, but it ain't fine 7.5 years later. We want a scientifically adequate explanation. Now, they've tried to present one, and again, I've read it. The NIST report, which came out in 2005 on the demise of the towers, and here's their explanation, using the North Tower as our case. After burning for about an hour and a half, the combination of these office fires and the initial impact of the plane, which had destroyed and weakened some columns, led the top part of the building, roughly the top 12 stories, to fall, to go into pretty much free fall, and to hit the rest of the building and to knock down the 98 stories. There's one or two chuckles there. Remember that of these 98 stories that were crushed, according to NIST itself, only about 6 were damaged by the plane and the fire. The other roughly 91 stories, they say, were fine structurally. In fact, the building acted the way it should have. In fact, the stress on the building, the bulk of the building, was less than it would be under a severe hurricane, they say. Building swayed, did what it was supposed to do, and had 283 intact steel columns. How on earth could the top 12 stories, falling a few feet on the rest of the tower, smash it to dust in between 14 and 24 seconds? Inherently implausible, I'm afraid, but we can actually test it. We can say, well, if that happened, then there must have been one heck of a jolt when that top part of the building smashed into the rest of the building. If there's no jolt, my friends, then the story is wrong, because there's nothing special about the weight of the top part of the tower. The building was made to keep it up. In fact, it was constructed to be able to hold up more than 3 times the weight, the weight of the top part of the tower. There was redundancy, of course, built into it. So, we can check, we can measure, we can use our brains, because we have lots of good video footage of the tower coming down, and so that's what a couple of us did. I described this process in detail last year at Walkerton. We find distances on the roof of the North Tower. We have precise times. We have 2 distances here, so that when one is not visible during the cloud of the collapse, we can use the other one. And guess what? This is the velocity curve for the first 114 feet of the fall of the North Tower. If there was a jolt, it had to take place during this first 114 feet. There isn't one. So therefore, the top part of the building did not smash into the rest of the building and pulverize it. It is physically impossible. And we've written this up. You can also, Tony Zambotti and I wrote this up. Tony was also here last year and presented a detailed engineering breakdown of the building. This is available on the internet. You can look it up, read it for yourself, make up your own mind. I won't try and persuade you. The missing jolt. And I'm quite assertive about this. I don't believe this is just pointing out an anomaly or a difficulty. I believe this is a refutation of the official hypothesis and shows that it is false. Now, if we're investigating a multiple homicide, which is what this is, we first of all want to rule out hypotheses that people are suggesting, and then we want to promote hypotheses that we think are more sensible. What I've been talking about up to this point in terms of the towers is mainly looking at the official leading hypothesis and saying it's impossible, couldn't happen. So then what do? Well, we use physical evidence that has survived. We use recordings, video, audio, seismic, and we use eyewitness testimony, all of which we have. And I'll just give you one example of each to build up our alternative hypothesis. And the alternative hypothesis is controlled demolition, that the towers, like World Trade 7, had explosives and possibly incendiaries to melt the steel planted in them, and that they were intentionally brought down, and that it therefore had to be an inside job. Physical evidence. This also is new since last year when I was here. This is an article published last month